speed up the building of tens of thousands of houses. The head of the Auckland Council's Planning Committee, Chris Darby, says at least 86 of those special housing areas no longer exist, and he doesn't know why.
I wish I could say at this stage, because there's a lot of interest in this. There's a lot of interest in not just the supply of housing in Auckland, but there's interest in the affordability of housing in Auckland. It's a chronic issue.
And developers in these areas got special treatment, such as the speedier consent process and rezoning. And under the system, at least 10% of the homes they built had to be classed as affordable. Housing group representatives told RNZ many developers sat on the land waiting for the housing accord to end and the replacement scheme, the Auckland Unitary Plan, to come into force, so they did not have to build any affordable homes. Mr Darby said he's been concerned about how the SHAs were being monitored for several months and what data the council was collecting, and wanted some answers.
If there are situations where the 10% affordability criteria have not been satisfied, we would want to understand why not, because there was a much easier path to development by signing up as a special housing area.
AUT's Professor of Construction Management, John Tukey, says the figures highlight the flaws in the housing accord.
We are expecting a commercial industry to deliver on a civic and social need. And unfortunately, those two positions are not necessarily collinear. They're not lining up alongside each other.
And the 3-year housing accord ended in May, but neither the council nor the government can say how many affordable houses have been built because no one's been tracking it. The council said it had no single system for monitoring exactly how many had been built and sold. And the Minister for Building and Construction, Nick Smith, told Morning Report that the provision for developers to sell 10% of their new homes at affordable rates was not his idea, and he disputed the government was failing on the Accord's promise to deliver affordable housing.
Definition of affordability is very much in the eyes of the beholder. Obviously, someone has bought the 4,751 new homes consented in those special housing areas.
Morning, Bill English. Have you been hearing Nick Smith in the last week or so? Is it affordability in the eye of the beholder in your view?
Well, in Auckland, affordability is improving. In fact, the debate around Auckland housing now is whether it would be acceptable for house prices to drop, because they've now been flat for 9 months or so.
You mean it's improving because of the market?
That's exactly right.
Nothing to do with you guys?
Well, the market, in the end, the market is what people are paying for houses. The council is the primary decision maker. Government has supported it with a whole range of policy shifts. The biggest single change in there has been the Auckland Unitary Plan, which was a big step forward from the time when special housing areas were put in place.
So when the developers in the special housing areas got special fast-track treatment so that 10% of the houses will be affordable, that hasn't happened and it doesn't matter?
Well, in some cases, it sounds like the special housing areas haven't proceeded. That is, the developer hasn't gone and actually built houses on it.
Well, apart from that, more than half of them have been disestablished, right?
Well, it's because they've been bypassed by what is now a much better arrangement, which is the Auckland Unitary Plan.
Why is it better?
Oh, because it actually allows the city to grow. I mean, Auckland was struggled for 20...
affordable housing, why is it better?
Because it allows the city to grow. And in the long run, affordability is all about enough new houses on the ground. There's about 10,000 a year coming on the ground. It's the highest it's been for 17 years or 12 years.
How do you know about the affordable housing status in Auckland?
Well, we look at the broader picture.
What's the broader picture?
The broader picture is getting more houses on the ground. That is happening. We've got the highest rates of construction that's been there for a long time, and it continues to grow. The government's announced its own program for its own land of 34,000 houses, and the Auckland Unitary Plan finally now, it's only been in place for 18 months or so, allows for the scale of housing that Auckland actually needs.
See, the worrisome thing is that we were told, as I reported a little earlier, that many developers sat on the land waiting for the accord to expire and the unitary plan to come into force, so they didn't have to build any affordable houses. So they got the special treatment, saying, yes, we'll build affordable houses, and then they didn't, and they hung on, and then they never had to. That's a rort, isn't it?
Look, as we...
Isn't it a rort, though?
Well, look, you need to look at the legal terms on which it all occurred. It does show the challenges of trying to, as the professor said, trying to inject lower cost houses into these situations where developers want to see a margin. I mean, the biggest challenge for developers at the moment in Auckland is the fact that house prices have stopped going up. They're flat, and in some places there's some indication that they've actually been falling slightly. Now, that is a challenge for developers who paid for the land, but the overall picture is one where we've got the highest rates of construction we've had for a long time. That is continuing, and that is good for housing affordability.
And you've probably got developers laughing all the way to the bank because they signed up for fast track and they said, yes, we'll build 10% affordable housing, and then they didn't, and now it's all over and they can go right on ahead. The flaw
I thought the point was exactly that they weren't going right on ahead. Isn't that the point? I mean, we can't have it both ways here.
No,
they're not building
going
the houses.
right. They're not building affordable houses because they waited long enough so that they didn't have to because the accord expired.
Well, if that's the nature of the agreement, then that's the nature of the agreement.
The flaw, surely, is expecting the market, expecting a commercial profit-driven industry to deliver a social need.
And that's exactly the point Nick Smith made earlier on. The council in Auckland was always keen to require a certain price for the housing, for some of the housing. We accepted that that's what an objective they wanted to achieve. In some cases, that hasn't actually happened. There'll be a lawyer's issue as to whether the rules have been broken or not. Overall, though, if the land is consented and the houses are consented and they're getting built, as 10,000 houses across Auckland in the last 12 months, then that is assisting housing affordability, and one measure of that, biggest single measure, is that house prices are flat or falling.
Let us speak about abuse in state care. What was your response to the petition and the open letter delivered to Parliament? No one from the national government received the petitioners.
Look, our response to that has been in place now for a number of years, and that is to deal with the cases, the claims that are made. There's individual written apologies from the minister.
You'll never get an accurate historical record by doing it piecemeal like that, though, will you? Do you not
care
about
that? Well, it depends. Well, I think the point of this discussion here is not whether people understand that abuse occurred. Absolutely. We know that. It occurred at some considerable scale, and you just got to see the scale and the intensity and the awfulness of some of the claims to understand that. And as MPs, I think most members of Parliament have dealt with cases. Certainly I have, any number of them over the years. So the question really is, what's going to best achieve what everyone's after? First, make sure none of it happens again. Well, we're going through a whole revamp of our care arrangements for children in care.
Without an accurate historical record of the substance and extent of the abuse, how will you make sure it doesn't happen again?
Well, we are making sure it doesn't happen again.
How do you know?
Right.
You don't have the historical record, and you'll only achieve that with a commission of inquiry.
Well, I beg to differ on this. The accuracy of the historical record won't affect what's happening to a 5-year-old today in care. I don't think the foster parents are sitting around looking up their index files to find out what happened in 1965.
We're talking about institutional memory, and we're talking about institutions. Unless there is some historical record, then how does anybody know?
Right, well, we know because there's so much overwhelming evidence that putting children into the care of a state without supervision and third-party oversight means that there's a high risk of abuse, and that occurred. We know that happened. The question now is, really now we've got this petition in place, we're hearing what is being said, we've got a process that currently deals with claims, and we need to work out whether what the petitioners are asking for is going to achieve more than what is being achieved. First, for children currently in care, because that is our top priority. That is more important than the historical record. Secondly, whether the resource that would go into a large-scale inquiry of the nature that's being proposed, which has intrinsic merit, but whether that resource is going to take away from the efforts to do much better for the kids who are in care now. And thirdly, whether that kind of historical record is going to somehow, over time, buttress the case for keeping a very close eye on the way governments work with children in care.
Why are you so averse to doing what comparable nations have done? Australia, Ireland, Canada, US, UK, they've all had commissions of inquiry. And indeed, the Canadian government's paid $2 billion to compensate 80,000 people, set up a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Is that what you're worrying about, the money?
No, we're doing all that. All those things. We haven't got the large-scale
inquiry. All this
inquiry.
is in public. You haven't got the large-scale inquiry.
No.
This is public testimonial, which you are not doing and you haven't done, and you seem to be insistent that you will not do.
Well, the question is whether it achieves the objective of greater protection for children in care as number one, and secondly, satisfaction for claimants is number two. And the satisfaction for the claimants is at least partially met by a process that's been in place for a number of years that settles the claims with compensation and apology. Now that we've got the petition, we can look at whether going further in some respect around the historical record is going to add to that. Certainly for some claimants, they're making it quite clear that's what they are after.
A very quick comment on the Greens water policy, 10 cents a litre for commercial bottled water companies. What do you think?
Well, if that was just the policy, it would be relatively straightforward, I suppose. But actually what they've actually said is they want to tax all water use and share, and they seem to have decided the water is owned by councils and iwi, because that's where the revenue would go. They've got to answer basic questions like what happens to the water going through our hydro dams. Is that going to be charged for? And what effect will that have on energy prices? And I think the issue here is that starting with a pretty straightforward proposition about paying for bottled water, they've made a huge leap into completely changing the system, I think, without understanding all the implications.
Appreciate your time, Bill English, Prime Minister. It's 26 minutes to 8 now.
And coming up before 8 on Morning Report, John Macbeth and Ron Polensky are with us to talk about the drawn test on Saturday night. Iraq declares victory in Mosul, and the Auckland marae that opened its doors to the homeless last year says it's gearing up to do it all over again. Now the headlines with Nicola Wright.
The Green Party co-leader Metiria Ture says it might be necessary to work with New Zealand First in government in order to take a pragmatic approach to politics. At the party's campaign launch at the weekend, Ms Ture called New Zealand First's policies racist and divisive. But neither party is ruling out working with the other after the election. Ms Ture told Morning Report if working with New Zealand First is the best way to get a progressive, inclusive government, her party would have to give that very serious consideration. RNZ's latest poll of polls shows the National Party would need support from New Zealand